The fascinating thing about Woodrow Wilson is that prior to becoming president, he was obviously governor of the state of New Jersey. He was president of Princeton University. But before all that, he wrote a paper. And in this paper, he argued that the presidency was largely a symbolic office at this point, the way that people think the vice presidency is today. He said that Congress had too much power, that basically the president had outsourced their power to Congress long before Wilson became the president, and that Congress was sort of running amok with power when really it should be the president who holds the most extreme amounts of power and is balanced out by 435 members in the U.S. Congress. What's fascinating is Wilson believed the president had too little power and that Congress had too much power. But when it came to the Treaty of Versailles, the treaty to end World War I that Wilson advocated for passage, it was Congress who ultimately won in killing the Treaty of Versailles, and Wilson who ended up failing in getting it approved. So in a sense, Wilson's own paper and thesis was proved correct when contrasted against the Treaty of Versailles. And I do think it's interesting to look at why. Why was Wilson advocating for the treaty? Why was the Congress advocating against? In my classroom, this is often a missed question when it comes to World War I history. It's often an overlooked question, is this idea that the Treaty of Versailles ends World War I, as brought about mainly by Woodrow Wilson in his 14 points, and yet the United States chooses not to ratify it. And there's not a lot of questions asked about why. So just to restate that, again, the President of the United States is bringing a treaty that ends World War I, a treaty that the United States favored, but a war that the United States got involved in late because it didn't directly affect the United States. Wilson campaigned in 1916 on keeping us out of war, and by 1917 we're in war. So the United States is not really even that involved in World War I until 1917, and yet here we are bringing about a peace. Fine, that's great. The United States is now on the world stage as a peacemaking nation. That's fantastic. But the treaty that the president brings is not then ratified by the Congress for that same country. Now, I imagine if you're the average French citizen, British citizen, German citizen at the time, I imagine it's probably pretty confusing. How on earth is it that the President of the United States can bring a treaty that ends World War I, the war to end all wars, and yet the Congress doesn't approve it? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And so what it indicates is that there are two different ideologies here. The president's operating under one ideology and the Congress is operating under a different one. And for the president, the ideology is this. What happened in World War I was tragic, absolutely devastating. Wilson saw some of the carnage. He visited some of the American grave sites in France. In fact, the French and the British really wanted him to see some of these places because they wanted that to take an emotional toll on the terms that he imposed on Germany. They wanted Wilson to be very tough on Germany, and so they wanted him to see the carnage so that he would go, oh my God, we can't ever allow this to happen again. And that's partly what happened. Wilson was a bit smarter than they anticipated, but that's mostly what happened. So Wilson says, we can't ever allow this to happen again. And we know that human passion and ambition are what they are, and that wars are going to flare up. And before they become world wars in the future, we must stop them. We must. And Wilson says, I know every objection about this, but we cannot allow this same thing to happen again. And for Wilson, it's personal because he sent as the commander-in-chief men and boys, 17, 18 years old, to die. He sent them to die to protect other people. And in his mind, he's thinking, I don't want to have to send other children to go die. So how do I prevent this in the future? A treaty. Specifically, Article 10 is what the Congress had issue with, which says that everyone in this treaty agrees to come to the support and aid of other countries in this treaty in the face of aggression, such as we saw with Germany. Essentially, we, all of us, are not going to allow this to happen again, because if one country starts moving in on other countries, we're going to stop it right away. That's Wilson's viewpoint, to prevent the carnage. The Congress's viewpoint, led by Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, was this. Well, George Washington told us that we as Americans should really keep out of foreign wars. We should keep out of foreign entanglements. And what you're doing as the President of the United States with this treaty is binding us to protect other countries without going through Congress. The President is supposed to, by the Constitution, formally request a declaration of war from Congress if he wants to use military action. And what President Wilson was asking the Congress to do was to outsource that power to him for the purposes of this treaty. And Senator Lodge and the rest of the Congress eventually said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And so it indicates, again, a difference in ideologies. Wilson saying, I don't want this to ever happen again, so how do we prevent it from happening? And the Congress saying, right, but we can't give you the power to make treaties or wars authorizing the death or the slaughter of potentially American soldiers without coming to Congress first, because then you've got American soldiers fighting France's war against Spain because of whatever, and none of this matters to the United States or impacts us. What are we doing here? So it's a really clear difference in perspectives. And I think if we look at when we're answering questions like, why did the United States get into World War I? Or were the terms of the Treaty of Versailles fair? I think questions like, who was right, have a tremendous amount of importance for us moving forward. By late 2025, we as a country have gotten to the point where presidents rarely declare wars. In fact, it's been 80 years since a formal declaration of war, yet we've been in conflicts all around the globe. And so it appears, in a sense, that Henry Cabot Lodge was correct, but ultimately, Woodrow Wilson is the one who got his way. And I think that makes the Treaty of Versailles a really interesting inflection point for American history moving forward. For more discussion, tips, study guides, tutoring, notes, and everything you could want to pass the AP U.S. history exam, please visit apwithmrg.com. I'll see you there.